Many of the occupations that we know in our time may not be around in the future. Did you know that in the very early days of Australia, wattle bark was used as a tanning agent for animal skins? These days it's all chemicals. I know this because my family were involved in that industry many years ago. What about the job of being a cupbearer? Now that's going back a bit further, perhaps thousands of years. The cupbearer's role was to ensure that the king's drinks were not spiked with poison. Perhaps a taste tester role. This was literally a front-line position to protect the king. Now I don't know if they still exist. Perhaps they do, that is cupbearers, taste testers, but whatever. Pharaoh had become upset with his cupbearer for some reason, also with his chief baker, and so they were thrown into prison. And it just so happened that Joseph was in prison at that same time, and that Joseph had found favour with the prison warden, and so he was put in charge of these new prisoners for caring for them and looking after them. Now one morning they had a very worried look on their faces, and Joseph asked them about it. And it seems that both of these men had had an unusual and very real dream, each different to the other. They spoke with some of the other prisoners, but no one knew what these dreams meant. Do you ever dream? Do you understand the meaning of those dreams? Listen to this. Joseph said to them, "Interpreting dreams is God's business." But he said to them, "Go ahead and tell me your dreams." Now the very first point that I see here is that Joseph not only knew God intimately, but he spent a lot of time in prayer, speaking and listening to God. God spoke to him. The chief cupbearer in his dream saw a grapevine with 3 branches that began to bud and blossom and then produce fruit. The grapes were squeezed and the juice put into the cup and given to Pharaoh. Joseph immediately revealed the meaning of that dream, telling the cupbearer that within 3 days his position would be fully restored. He would once again be Pharaoh's cupbearer. And Joseph suggested that when he was back in favour with Pharaoh, that this cupbearer should bring to Pharaoh's attention the fact that Joseph was here in prison and that he'd done nothing to deserve what he was facing. And now when the chief baker saw that Joseph had given such a positive interpretation to his cellmate, he too shared his dream. Now in his dream he saw 3 baskets of pastries, but the birds came and ate them from them. Joseph told him that that dream meant that in 3 days he would be dead. Oh. Well, in 3 days' time it just happened to be Pharaoh's birthday. And the cupbearer was fully reinstated to his position. And indeed, the baker did die a miserable death. So what's our take home for today? Well, notice that Joseph cared for others despite his imprisonment, despite his slavery and then imprisonment. He could easily have just curled up in the corner and sulked and spoken to no one. It would be naive to think that Joseph didn't struggle during those 13 years. I'm sure that there were tears, and he would have experienced times of darkness and despair. But this was not the end. He trusted God. He may have lost the prime of his life years, but God rewarded him many times over in later years. You see, Joseph trusted God. He knew that he was not alone and that God was still in there working his purposes out, even if it was taking some time. Remember Joseph's appeal to the cupbearer to not forget him when he returned to his position in the palace? The cupbearer forgot. He was so happy to be back where he belonged that he simply didn't remember Joseph at that time. We can only begin to imagine Joseph's disappointment when he realised that nothing was going to come out of that situation. And if it was to be another 2 years, and it was to be another 2 years before anything would happen. Was God still with Joseph? Yes. Did Joseph feel like he'd been forgotten? I would think yes. Did Joseph still trust God? Absolutely yes. Today, are there people that we should be remembering? People who have made a difference to our life. People we should be praying for at the very least. Please don't focus so much on your own problems that you forget everyone else. In closing, listen to these words from the Lord to you and to me as recorded in Isaiah 55, 8 to 11, straight from the Message Bible today. I don't think the way you think. The way you work isn't the way I work. This is God's decree. For as the sky soars high above the earth, so the way I work surpasses the way you work. And the way I think is beyond the way that you think. Just as rain and snow descend from the skies and don't go back until they've watered the earth, doing their work of making things grow and blossom, producing seed for farmers and food for the hungry, so will the words that come out of my mouth not come back empty-handed. They'll do the work that I sent them to do. They'll complete the assignment I gave them. This is certainly worth considering and thinking about. I trust that you have a great week, and remember, you're blessed to be a blessing.